Hello and welcome to the semester premiere, Spring 2019 of VU Sports Wired. Cutler Klein, Simon Gibbs, Ryan Shee here with you in studio. Thank you so much for tuning in. We've got a great show to kick off the spring semester. We got a lot to talk about in terms of football and basketball, but first, we got to think a little more big picture here. We'll start off this one with perhaps the biggest long-term news that came out of Vanderbilt in the last month or so. Vanderbilt has hired a new athletic director. Malcolm Turner was the hire to replace David Williams. He will start at the beginning of February 1st, 2019. He will take the reins of Vanderbilt athletics. Malcolm Turner, one of the most outside-the-box hires for any major Power 5 school in recent memory, has experience with Wasserman Media Group and most recently the NBA G League that he was able to raise to new heights in some ways. He got their title sponsorship with Gatorade. He revolutionized the way that the league is covered, that raised its media profile, and has done a lot in terms of drawing talent to the league and making it a viable second division in professional basketball. And he's done a lot. He's got a lot of experience, and he's talked a lot about what he wants to start getting done at Vanderbilt. He wants to start listening to the people here. He wants to learn what the situation is, and he's going to come in and really start to make a little bit of noise here once he gets started in February. So I wanted to ask you all, just on papers right now, did Vanderbilt get this hire right? It's obviously tough to tell because he hasn't done anything yet, but just on paper, based on his resume, and based on what Vanderbilt needs at this moment in terms of facilities, marketing, etc., did Vanderbilt get this hire right?
I think it was a great hire, and I think it's so innovative, as you said, but I'll get to that. When you Google his name, when I first Googled Malcolm Turner's name after the hire, I saw nothing but praise from great people in the sports industry. The one that stood out to me was former Commissioner David Stern said, quote, "Malcolm's an extremely talented executive and an all-around great person. The NBA benefited tremendously from his leadership, acumen, and collaborative mindset. I have no doubt he will bring that same commitment to excellence here at Vanderbilt." And I think, David Stern aside now, Cutler wrote about this in an article for the Vanderbilt Hustler, that this is the innovation that Vanderbilt needs. We're in a new age of Vanderbilt athletics, the Coach Drew era, the Coach Corbin era, the Derek Mason era. And we're seeing success and we're seeing innovation. We're seeing the teams really progress without getting the support that they need to get potentially to the next level. I do think baseball has that support, but football and basketball could really benefit from a little bit of marketing, a little bit of restructuring, whether it be stadium upgrades, team upgrades, whatever. And you can't buy into, or you can't hire an athletic director that's going to stand by this old status quo of just not supporting these teams as much as they need. And I think bringing in someone as innovative as Malcolm Turner creates that potential for higher level programs because he knows what what he needs to do to get these teams to the next level, and he knows that most importantly there are still plenty of things to do with marketing and stadium upgrades. But I want to point out, and another thing you mentioned in your article, is that the way he made that strategic partnership between Gatorade and the D League, turning it into the G League, is really a look into his abilities. I think he's done a great job of marketing, and I think he's done the same things that you would see in a successful collegiate ambassador like him, what he's about to become, despite having no experience working in a collegiate athletic department.
I think that's all right. What we're dealing with here is an outside-the-box hire. Yeah. This is not someone who was either promoted from within or even drawn from another arena similar to this, like another collegiate program, even another Power 5 program. But he does have experience in, I think, what Vandy needs the most, which is that when he was the commissioner of the G League, he was basically responsible for the development of future NBA talent and guys that were eventually going to move up into the association. And given that Vanderbilt has traditionally had a bit of a shortage in support for some of the major teams, funding, and recruiting issues, things like that, the ability to develop talent into its maximum potential and to invest in the infrastructure that these teams are going to need in order to maximize their potential, I don't think there's anyone who's going to be able to know how to do that better than a guy who spent the previous couple of years doing exactly that for the highest level of competition of basketball in the world.
I mean, the main criticism of this, or the main kind of concern, is that he doesn't have collegiate administration experience. But if anything, that could be turned into a plus. He doesn't have any experience, so he doesn't understand the kind of norms and kind of what usually happens. So he doesn't really need to abide by them. He doesn't know. He doesn't know them. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to feel constrained by that. Obviously, and I'm not talking about whether like within the bylaws of the NCAA. Obviously, he knows how to handle compliance and stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm saying he doesn't the norms and customs that maybe might limit some people. He might not know, so he doesn't follow them. He does it his own way, and I think that will bring a unique perspective. And I almost see some similarities between what Vanderbilt is right now and what the G League was when Malcolm Turner took it over. They're both products that have a lot of untapped potential, that maybe don't get the attention that they deserve sometimes, that maybe were kind of been good, but have kind of been stuck in a place and needed to get to the next level. And what he did was he turned it into a product and an entity that people talk about, that is a little more, that is just has raised its profile a little bit, made it a desirable thing, made it a product that people pay attention to. I think you can do the same for Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt right now is in a place that maybe they don't get the attention they deserve, maybe they don't have all the flashiness yet, but if Malcolm Turner can make upgrades here and there, can raise its profile, then I think they can do pretty big things going forward. And I think that's what makes the difference, is that it's turning something that's good into something that is great.
Yeah.
And that's what I think his big skill set is going to be.
I've got one question for the two of you. Sorry. So as you mentioned, he takes his office in early February. How long do you see this, decision coming to fruition, when we could really say he's either, done what we thought he could, or maybe had a little issues with having no previous experience in the college atmosphere? And what do you really think his first priorities are?
Stadium. It's got to be the stadium first. It's got to be the football stadium, and figuring out what you need. Not only that, and the football stadium and facilities in general. Like the stadium is just the microcosm of the issue with facilities, and it's improving the facilities in Memorial Gym. It's fixing up little things here and there for the other teams, making improvements elsewhere. It's got to be facilities first, because that's something that impacts student athletes. That's something that impacts recruiting. When recruits see that teams have state-of-the-art facilities. Now, I'm not saying they need to go and add a video arcade and whirlpools and everything like Alabama and Clemson have, because that's just no college program should have that, in my opinion. But I'm saying it's just basic upgrades, figuring out what you're going to do with the stadium, figuring out what you're going to do with all these facilities, giving these programs the resources that they need. And I think the time frame for that is really, obviously he can't just snap his fingers and give Vanderbilt a multi-million-dollar stadium upgrade. But I think in his first 100 days, he's going to have to hit the ground running and try and talk to the people, talk to donors, talk to athletes, talk to coaches, figure out what they need, and find out a way to do it. And I think he's spending his time. He was at the Texas Bowl. He was in town in December meeting with donors and meeting with people. And that should be really his priority. That should be what he's doing, is getting to know them and building that trust and rapport, so that in March or April, when he says, hey, Derek Mason says he needs these upgrades to the football stadium, can I count on you for that? It can happen a little bit easier than it might otherwise happen.
Right.
I think his main goal, I wouldn't necessarily say the stadium has to be first thing. I think the inevitable goal of what's going to make the basketball and football team better, because the baseball team is pretty much already competing at almost a national championship level annually. The basketball and the football program are eventually going to need to be able to recruit better players. And I think eventually that goes down the line to, yes, facilities are probably have to be Malcolm Turner's new priority, because as you said, when they come in, and if you see that your life is going to be very easy here, if you see that you're going to have the tools in front of you to make yourself better, in order to rehab, in order to get stronger, faster, more talented, you're going to have the support staff around you to be able to accommodate and just focus on being the best student athlete you can be. That's what's going to entice these recruits. That's what's going to get more talent in the building. And once you have that, you win, you build that rapport, and it's a lot easier to build the rapport when you're having success than it is when you're having losing seasons. So I think that the training facilities probably need to be the priority that comes first. The stadium is probably going to be what makes most of the headlines, though. That's what has been talked about for years at this point. It seems like the administration almost was dodging it at times. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure from both internal Vandy media and Vanderbilt media that's covered, outside in newspapers and on blogs and stuff like that to make sure that they're trying to fix up that stadium, change it, make it better. I think I saw something recently where it got voted the worst stadium in the FBS.
Yeah.
Kind of embarrassing, but all things considered, the fans are going to respond more positively, I think, to have a team having more success than the seats that they're in when that team has said success.
Yeah.
And so the priority needs to be on improving the teams, and then once that comes, you get more support, you get that funding, and then you can make the fans even happier now that they have a good team and a good place to enjoy that team from.
Yeah, and I'll use basketball as an example for this. I mean, Bryce Drew already is doing wonders for recruiting here right now. He has, he got Garland and Shatu and Neesmith in this year. He's got a couple of good guys next year. Scottie Pippen was on campus this weekend with his son touring around. That would have never happened before.
Spelled differently.
Yeah, Scotty's spelled differently, yet still junior, which is the most fascinating thing ever, and I love it. But, and then for next year, Bryce Drew has his eyes on a couple of really potentially good 4 or 5-star talents. Guys like Keon Johnson and Walker Kessler are real guys that they're in contention for. And he's doing that now, before any of these facilities have happened. So once he kind of gets the ball rolling, once they kind of realize, it kind of begets itself, is you have a coach that people believe in, you get some good talent, you see them have success. And the same thing with Derek Mason, too. You see guys like Keyshawn Vaughn having success under Mason. You see guys like Kyle Shermer with 4 years getting to the pros. You add in a shiny new stadium, some shiny new facilities for these guys. They like that. More elite talent comes in, and once more other younger talent sees those guys succeed and get to the next level and develop their potential there, it becomes a cycle. It becomes a cycle that is all contingent on getting the right coach in there and getting the right facilities in so that these players can be the best that they can be. And once that happens, and once a lot of those institutional barriers are lifted, I think you can see a lot more success. So I think he's got a lot of potential, but he's also got a lot of work to do, and we'll see what happens kind of in his first 100 days, even with just some of those smaller things aside from the stadium and just the way he kind of goes about it. It should be really interesting to see. Moving on now to Vanderbilt football. Their season came to an end in the Texas Bowl, Vanderbilt losing by a touchdown to the Baylor Bears. It was a tough game for Vanderbilt, an offensive explosion from both teams, but on defense, just struggled a little bit throughout most of the game in terms of tackling and getting off the field. Vanderbilt, the beneficiary of a lot of explosive plays, especially from Keyshawn Vaughn, the running back who had a career night in Houston. So, guys, I want to ask you, it was a good thing for Vanderbilt to even get to the postseason in the first place. That was just kind of icing on the cake just getting there. But in this game, they struggled a little bit at times. Now you're losing some senior talent. But then again, it's a bowl game. It's hard to judge too much based on these bowl games. But how much can you take away from what happened in this game, for the future of the team? How much can you kind of give it weight?
I actually think it's hard to look at the future just yet. I think certain questions need to be answered, some of which will be answered on Monday or by Monday. But, we need to know if Keyshawn Vaughn is staying after his performance especially. We need to know if Jared Pinkney is staying. We need to know if Coach Mason will be able to bring in a freshman class that could come in and compete at the next level in the SEC. We need to know if we can really patch up those if Coach Mason can patch up those defensive gaps that were gaping in that game against Baylor. That said, I think this game means a lot for the program. The same way I think in the previous topic we were just talking about, bringing in recruits for basketball such as Darius Garland and Simi Shitu sets the precedent for future recruits. I think Vanderbilt making the postseason sets the precedent for people looking into this school for football, because you ultimately want to join a winning team. You don't want to join a program that is in shambles. You don't want to join a program that is consistently the laughingstock of the SEC, because Vanderbilt football is no longer the laughingstock of the SEC.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I think there's almost two different discussions you can have here, and both determining what you can take away from the Outback, or not the Outback, my goodness, Texas Bowl itself, and just the future of the team in general. Taking away direct, lessons from the Texas Bowl is the Vanderbilt offense showed us exactly what they were showing us the last 2 games of the season that propelled them into the bowl game itself. That team can play.
Yeah.
There seemed to be like a switch that flipped at some point in the Ole Miss game, in which Andy Ludwig started calling plays that were just, they were moving the ball down the field in creative ways. Keyshawn was taking off. Kyle Shermer was making great decisions with the football. And that's a team that was putting up points. The defense, as you alluded to, there were some big holes in that. The number one thing that I saw was that they were having some issues tackling. And like you would see that when the Baylor receivers got in the open space, they weren't making plays, and they were getting all kinds of yards after catch. And so coming out of that game now, we're in a very similar situation to where we were 2 years ago after the bowl game loss to NC State. It's almost like a crossroads for the program in that, are we going to do what happened the following season, in which they went 5-7, didn't make a bowl game, then cycled back to the same process now? Or is this going to be a stepping stone in order to climb up that ladder of the SEC? Because as you mentioned, Vanderbilt is no longer the bottom of the SEC. They're on this slow, steady rise, and as long as these constants that were really propelling the team this year continue to improve at the rate they were improving, this is a team that's going to be back on, in the running with some of the better teams in the SEC in not too long.
I think it's difficult to compare the last two bowl appearances because in 2016 in Shreveport, they kind of sneak into a bowl game at the end of the year, but they really didn't look like they belonged on the same field as NC State in that game. They got blown out of the water in that game. NC State kind of torched them on offense, and Vanderbilt's offense couldn't really get anything going. In this game, Vanderbilt looked like they very much belonged with Baylor in this game. It was close. It was back and forth. They got some explosive plays. As many times as Baylor torched them in kind of a slow burn, Vanderbilt just absolutely set them ablaze with a couple of those long runs, including on the first drive of the game with Kari Blossingame breaking that one off, which, by the way, brilliant play structure done by Andy Ludwig on that play. You saw the line, you saw them kind of fake it to the right, then you saw the line shift left in front of Blossingame, and he was gone. The blocking was impeccable, the play execution was great, and the play call was phenomenal.
Yeah.
You saw a lot of really good things out of that. And now, like you said, Simon, it's about who comes back next year. And with Keyshawn Vaughn and Jared Pinkney potentially coming back, they can return a lot of weapons. It's just a matter of solving the quarterback problem next year without Kyle Shermer.
Also, in a shootout game like this, with the exception of Alabama, Vanderbilt could very well have played the most entertaining SEC bowl game this year.
Oh, yeah.
I could straight up say that, and that is important for the whole country to see. I mean, win or lose, they played their hearts out, and this team looks miles better than it's been in years past. But in order for the Commodores to improve next year or to continue improving, I think they have to settle the quarterback situation. So, I mean, I don't know what you make of the quarterback situation. I think it's a toss-up right now, but if you had to pick someone to start, who do you think would start?
Deuce Wallace, probably. I think he gets his chance. He's been here for a few years. If he has a good spring and has a good fall camp, I think he definitely gets the chance. And there's something to be said for the way the offense is structured around him, because I don't think much changes, depending on, now, of course, Andy Ludwig's rumored in the mix for that Utah coordinator job. So who knows what could happen there. But in terms of the way this offense looked, and I think the way the team looked in this game, it was the reaction to that game wasn't poor Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt really didn't belong in that game. They got trashed. They were horrible. It was more like, that was a fun game. Sorry someone had to lose it.
Yeah. It
was by a touchdown. The score was 45-38. It was entertaining. It was wild. Nobody went and looked at that game and said Vanderbilt got embarrassed in that game.
Yeah.
Or Vanderbilt should be embarrassed by that performance. It was more like, that was fun. That was a roller coaster, especially because they were working against the standard of the previous night's Cheez-It Bowl that had more turnovers than points throughout most of it. But I think there's a bright future to be had for this team, and especially with the number of quarterbacks that they could plug in there.
Yeah. I think that one question I did have coming out of the Texas Bowl was that I wondered what Vanderbilt's mentality going into that bowl game was. I wondered if there might not have been quite the sense of urgency that Baylor had. And what really jogged this was, I remember hearing a quote from the Baylor head coach before this. They were coming off of a 1-11 season, I believe it was, last year. And so not only making it to a bowl this year probably would have been enough for a team like that in a program in the position that they were. But the coach specifically mentioned how he stayed on his team all week, and how the team really bought into the idea that simply making it to the postseason was not what they considered to be the standard. They wanted to win the postseason game.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of Coach Mason. I've defended him even when there was, some road bumps here and there the past couple of seasons. I think he really brings the best out of the players that he has. But I can't help but wonder if there was maybe a bit of a lack of motivation for some of the Vanderbilt players, especially, given that this was it was a rough road to get here, and they maybe almost could have been in a better bowl game had some of the games this season gone their way that didn't. So it was a question of, did Vandy leave their best performance on the field? And offensively, I think you can absolutely say yes. Defensively, I don't think that this defense came and played out the way that it needs to and the way it's capable of.
I really don't think that they had a motivation problem. I mean, you talked to the players before the game, as a lot of the senior players said, they saw what happened in Shreveport. They weren't motivated in Shreveport in the Independence Bowl in 2016. Yeah. They saw how, lack of motivation, even in the week games, the kind of pre-bowl activities leading up to it, in like eating contests and things like that, where it's kind of like, oh, we'll get them on the field in the game, and then they didn't. So in Houston, they were competitive. They wanted to win the Rodeo Bowl, and then they did. They talked about that. That's legitimately one of the things that they said. Like even in the pre-bowl events, they saw how just bringing a competitive mindset can help you kind of be in the zone in that week. I don't really think that there was a lack of motivation, because a lot of the seniors on this team saw what a lack of motivation could do, and it didn't work out for them in Shreveport. And unfortunately, it was two really motivated teams butting heads, and one of them had to lose it, and it happened to be Vanderbilt by one possession. It was really by a one-possession score.
But I do think what Ryan brings up about their mindset going into the game brings up their preparation for the game. And you have to imagine that they knew that Charlie Brewer was going to try and run the ball. Mm-hmm. And it didn't help. Charlie Brewer had 16 rushes for over 100 yards and a touchdown. It seemed like every time he broke through the line of scrimmage, he was going to get a first down or close to it. And that's something that is absolutely detrimental to a defense, because normally you're trying to stop the pass and the run. But now you've got a third component in the QB run, and you still have to maintain the running backs and the wide receivers. It becomes a very difficult ball game for the Vanderbilt defense to win.
Yeah, and this is something that our good friend Max Schneider had talked to players about before the game too, is that when you're practicing, you're not making live tackles. You're not hitting as hard as you could. You're not really hitting at all. And when you have a month when you're not hitting anybody, that takes a toll. That can be you're not as mentally prepared to make a tackle and move through the contact as you might normally be, and that cost them. They didn't have the right angles a lot of the time. They allowed Baylor players to break tackles. They allowed them to get extra yards when they didn't deserve them, and that's what ultimately made the difference in the game. And I think it was a problem for both teams, because Baylor couldn't tackle players either. Baylor had a little bit of a trouble tackling players, especially Keyshawn Vaughn. They broke through, I think, 8 of their players on one of those long runs that was almost a touchdown. So, I think that kind of almost comes with the territory of playing in a bowl game. And as more of these younger players get the experience of playing, because you saw a lot of players out there that you kind of had to look up their numbers and say, who is this guy playing out there on the field right now? Why is he in the game? He's in the game because he can get experience. Yeah. And because that is going to affect him further down the line than it is a senior who's playing in his last game.
Right.
So once they have this experience, and maybe they'll be in 2-3 more bowl games throughout their career, maybe more, who knows? But, I think that'll help them certainly moving forward. We have to get to our last topic here, which is Vanderbilt basketball. As we speak, getting underway in Athens, Georgia, taking on the Bulldogs. Will be a big game for them, not just for the opponent. I mean, Georgia is going to be a motivated team after getting blown out by Tennessee the other day. But this is a game that Vanderbilt really has to have if they want to build that confidence in SEC play. They lost to Ole Miss in the SEC opener. It was the free throws and scoring down the stretch that really cost them. Two things that, in my mind, come down to composure, and you get composure by having experience in these big moments. So do you think that, I'll ask you guys this, you might just agree or disagree with me on this. Do you think that going down the line here, as SEC play gets underway, that Vanderbilt basketball is going to improve in these big SEC games just by having played in more SEC games? I would argue that a lot of it could happen, because they did a lot of the bigger things right against Ole Miss. They just couldn't find those little things like those free throws every here and there.
I agree, and I think it's not even necessarily an improvement. It could be an improvement, but I think it's also, free throw shooting is something that should consistently fall. It could have just not been their day from the charity stripe.
Yeah.
And when you shoot 55 to 60%, I believe it was 58 in the end, as a team, you're giving away free points that ultimately cost them the ball game. It does not matter how they played in the last few minutes. If they had made half of the free throws they missed, the ball game would have been completely different. So I think the biggest problem is free throw shooting. I think it's one that can improve. It's one that may not need to be improved. It could be something that just, as I said, they had an off night.
Really, I think what we can take away from the Ole Miss game is that, yeah, there was really, in terms of like 5-on-5 play, there wasn't much of a difference between the two teams. I thought it was a very evenly played game. You saw that in the halftime score that I believe it was only about a 1-point difference, 2-point difference at halftime, something like that. And then down the stretch, you saw Vandy missing these free throws. It was just like every time that somebody went to the line, it was like, man, did they just give away 2 points there? Is that what's going on? So as far as that improving and that being as a result of the composure that they're going to gain from playing in more games, I think that's definitely a possibility. I think, now having never played collegiate basketball myself, I can't exactly say how to improve one's free throw shot. But I think that when you're in the moment more, you tend to relax, settle down, and most of these players have free throw percentages that were far higher than what they were shooting in that game and really what they've been shooting for most of the season.
Yeah.
So I think once they really get into a rhythm, and that's all it's going to take is getting into a flow, into a rhythm, into the game motion that's, that we're really getting some team cohesion moving. Once you get into a moment like that and you feel comfortable in it, I think that it just becomes natural. And that's not really going to be an issue moving down the stretch as long as this admittedly very young team continues to play higher level opponents. They'll get a feel for the moment and they'll kind of settle into it.
Yeah, I mean that's the kind of thing that gives me a little bit of confidence in this team going forward is that they did all of the big things right. They set themselves up to be able to win that game. They were staying out of foul trouble. They really didn't foul a lot very often. They were getting penetration. They were kind of figuring things out until the stretch run on offense. They got stops defensively. They had players stepping up. Simi Shatu, the star on this team now without Darius Garland, was stepping up, was making big plays. In moments that they needed it up until the stretch, Matt Ryan was hitting three-pointers. They didn't shoot well from three overall, but that is something that definitely will be corrected. It was definitely another off night. If anything, the things that they did wrong were far more correctable than the things that they did right if they had done those things wrong. If you get what I'm saying there, the things that they did wrong were far more correctable than anything else.
And adding on to what Ryan said, he says we should be getting into, or the team should be getting into a rhythm. I think it's just as much about not getting into a funk. And what I mean by that is, first off, you don't want to drop game after game after game. That would be bad. But more importantly, the 24-hour rule can and should be in effect. You lose a game, you relive, you watch film, one day of just pure digesting what happened, and then moving forward. Because I myself also haven't played college basketball, unfortunately, but I can tell you that if they go to the charity stripe in this next game, thinking about how poorly they shot at the charity stripe last game, it's going to happen again.
Yeah, no, I fully think that. And I think, with how little experience that they have, I think that they can move forward. I think this Georgia game was a great opportunity for that. We will obviously see what happened there, but you saw down the stretch in this game, when they got defensive stops, but on offense they couldn't. They missed open looks. I mean, they just looked rattled. Yeah. They looked uncomposed. They looked like nobody wanted to step up. Nobody wanted to be the hero. It was not that nobody wanted to be the hero. Nobody wanted to make the mistake. Nobody wanted to be the guy that missed the shot, and so whoever took it just ended up missing the shot. And so they just looked lost a little bit out there. And I think that will definitely come with a little bit of time. They can kind of figure out how to finish off a game like that, because they very well could have won that down the stretch. 2 of those threes fall in the final 3 minutes, and Vanderbilt's up by 1. So all of a sudden.
What do you two make of the lineup change tonight as Joe Toye steps out and freshman Aaron Naismith takes the starting lineup?
I think it's a reward for Naismith for how well he's been playing. Yeah. I mean, he didn't have the best night against Ole Miss, but not a lot of players did. But I think he's been really, really solid. He's a great shooter. I think he's one of their better defensive players, and he'll only get better as he improves. And I think he'll be a significant contributor.
I agree.
I have been a pretty big Aaron Naismith fan especially as season's gone on. I think he was almost the forgotten guy in this recruiting class.
Absolutely.
Behind Darius and Simi, who were rightfully touted as their 5 stars. But Naismith, not only is he severely underrated in the paint, but from beyond the arc, he's probably Vanderbilt's most dedicated three-point shooter besides Matt Ryan. I mean, this is a guy who could put points on the board, and defensively, he also, He's getting better at defense. He's not, I wouldn't say he's like a lockdown defender as of right now, but I think he's currently on the path where he can play both ways. He can play all over the court. He can dish it. He can shoot it. He can defend. He can do everything. And so I really like that they're inserting him in there, given that I think it lends itself to a more mobile, more hot-handed approach to the lineup.
And I think there's no one that hustles more than he does night in and night out. You always
I agree
notice
with
how hard he's running, how fired up he gets in big moments. He's always the guy that's providing the juice, providing the energy moving forward in certain games. With that, that'll do it for this week's edition of VU Sports Wired. A lot of great basketball and football talk here, and we'll have plenty more as the semester rolls on. For Ryan Sheehy, Simon Gibbs, I'm Cutler Klein saying so long, and we'll see you next time.